Let's jump right in. If you're dealing with environmental compliance, the sheer volume of rules can feel pretty overwhelming. Today, we're breaking down exactly how local authorities get the power to police hazardous materials. We're going to skip the heavy legal jargon and just figure out who actually holds the clipboard when it's time for an inspection.
Think about it for a second. With massive amounts of hazardous material moving across the country every single day, how does the government actually keep tabs on all of it? I mean, if a single office in Washington, D.C. tried to manage every permit and surprise inspection across millions of square miles, well, the whole system would just grind to a halt in red tape. It's a logistical nightmare.
So the solution to that nightmare is basically a franchise model. The National Environmental Agency acts like corporate headquarters. They drop the blueprints and set the baseline safety standards, but they let individual states apply to become local franchise operators. In regulatory speak, this is called state authorization. Once a state gets that green light, they take over the day-to-day enforcement right in their own backyard.
Here's our quick roadmap for today's breakdown. First, who polices hazardous waste? Second, the state approval playbook. Third, tracking the waste trail. Fourth, the power to enforce. Fifth, what happens when things go wrong? And finally, number 6, the bottom line.
Okay, starting with Section 1, who polices hazardous waste? The corporate HQ versus the local branch. Let's figure out who you're actually answering to.
The whole idea here is empowerment paired with strict oversight. The national government actually wants states to run their own programs. Why? Because local agencies know their specific industries and communities way better than a federal bureaucrat thousands of miles away. But there is a massive catch. States can take the wheel, for sure, but they absolutely have to drive by the national rulebook. They can't just go rogue.
Moving on to Section 2, the state approval playbook. Signing that franchise agreement. Corporate doesn't just hand over the keys to anybody who asks. The magic word here is consistency. Think of the federal rules as the absolute minimum safety floor. But, and this is absolutely crucial for your own compliance strategy, your local state agency can legally write rules that are much tougher than the national standard. Maybe they want extra permits or more frequent reporting. What they cannot do, under any circumstances, is be more lenient. There's no relaxing the rules just to attract new business. To actually get that authority, a state has to put together a massive application. We're talking a formal letter from the governor, a legally binding sign-off from the state attorney general, the whole 9 yards. But the biggest hurdle? Proving they actually have the money and the personnel to do the job. Headquarters won't approve a state that's broke or understaffed, because let's face it, an unfunded mandate is an unenforced mandate. Let's hit Section 3, tracking the waste trail. This is all about the chain of custody. Once a state is in charge, their number one job is making sure absolutely nothing vanishes.
They pull this off using a really rigorous tracking system. Basically, anyone who touches the hazardous material has to leave a trail. It starts with the creator, the facility that actually generates the waste. They pack it up and start the paper trail. Next, the transporter has to carry exact documentation matching that specific load. And finally, the receiving facility has to sign off. Now that this is mostly moving to a centralized digital database, if a truck leaves your factory but never shows up at the disposal site, yeah, alarm bells are going to go off instantly.
That brings us to Section 4, the power to enforce, giving the rules teeth. Because a paper trail doesn't really matter if the state can't back it up on the ground. States are legally required to have real enforcement muscle. They need the authority to show up unannounced for surprise inspections, just to make sure your paperwork matches reality. They also have to maintain active hotlines for public complaints, have the power to issue immediate cease and desist orders, and, if it comes down to it, the legal chops to drag non-compliant businesses into court. On to Section 5, when things go wrong, the or else. So, what actually happens when a business decides to ignore the rules, or maybe even worse, when the state itself drops the ball? For bad actors, the financial hit is pretty brutal. States must be able to hand out civil penalties of at least $10,000. But here's the real kicker. That's $10,000 for every single day the violation continues. If you ignore a rule for a month, you're suddenly staring down hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. And if a business intentionally breaks the rules, the state can and will pursue criminal charges and jail time.
But what if the state is the one messing up? Say they act like a negligent franchise owner. They stop doing inspections or they refuse to issue fines. In that case, national headquarters will absolutely step back in. They can formally revoke the state's authorization, strip away their power, and just take over operations completely. At the end of the day, the federal government always holds the trump card. Finally, Section 6, the bottom line, why this matters to you. Let's ground this and see what it means for your actual day-to-day compliance.
Your biggest takeaway here is this. Even though the national government wrote the original playbook, you are almost certainly answering to your local state agency. You need to know their specific rules inside and out, especially since they might be a lot stricter. Make sure your digital and paper tracking is flawless. Compliance isn't just a box you check off once a year. It's a daily, active duty.
I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Environmental regulations are constantly evolving. They require total vigilance and a crystal clear understanding of exactly who is holding the clipboard. Whether you're dealing with a tough state agency today or hypothetically facing federal regulators tomorrow, your internal systems just have to be bulletproof. Thanks for joining our breakdown today, and keep your operations running clean and compliant.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.